here. There's my hand. I'm picking it up. And this is hefty. This is a big piece. Once again, you can hear it just underfoot. Oh, aluminum. Just plain blown to a million bits. The left wingtip hit that spot right there, preceding the nose impact. For the sake of orientation, there's Vegas. Nellis in that direction, and the plane flew straight here and straight into this cliff.
Have you ever wondered how a simple mistake could change history forever? What really happened to Carole Lombard's final flight on that dark night so many years ago? They finally found the location of Carole Lombard's airplane crash, and the story behind it will leave you thinking long after it ends. Let's get into it. The crash happened on Mount Potosi, which is part of the Spring Mountain Range near Las Vegas. After taking off from Las Vegas Airport, the plane flew almost 7 miles off its intended path. Instead of following the safe airway using radio navigation, the pilots used a magnetic compass heading of about 218 degrees. This wrong heading led them in a straight line directly into the steep side of Mount Potosi. The airplane struck the mountain at around 7,770 feet, just about 80 feet below the top of the cliff. Transcontinental and Western Air, often called TWA, operated a flight known as Flight 3. This plane followed a long route across the country, starting from New York City and heading toward Burbank, California. Along the way, it made several planned stops at different cities, including Indianapolis, St. Louis, Albuquerque, and Las Vegas. Each stop allowed the aircraft to refuel and pick up or drop off passengers. Moving forward to the early morning of January 16, 1942, something important occurred. At around 4 o'clock in the morning, actress Carole Lombard boarded Flight 3 in Indianapolis. She was not traveling alone. Her mother, the press agent for her husband, Clark Gable, and her own MGM studio press agent were also with her. Carole Lombard had just completed a successful trip through the Midwest. During this trip, she worked hard to promote war bonds and support the country during World War II. Her efforts raised more than $2 million, which was a huge achievement at that time. Feeling excited and eager to reunite with her husband, Clark Gable, in Los Angeles, she decided to take the flight instead of a slower journey by train. This decision, filled with hope and anticipation, would soon become a part of a much larger and tragic story. When the plane stopped in Albuquerque, an unexpected situation occurred. Carole Lombard and the people traveling with her were asked to give up their seats for the next part of the flight. The airline needed space for 15 United States Army Air Corps members heading to California. However, Carole Lombard did not want to leave the flight. She explained that she had just finished raising money for the war effort and felt her work was also important. After speaking with the station agent, she convinced him to allow her group to stay on the flight. As a result, other passengers, including the famous violinist Joseph Szigeti, had to leave instead. After this change, the original pilots and crew stepped off, and a new flight crew took charge in Albuquerque. Because there were more people on board now and strong headwinds were expected, the plan was to stop for refueling in Winslow, Arizona. However, once the plane was in the air, the new captain decided to skip that stop and fly straight to Las Vegas instead. Later, the plane quickly stopped at Las Vegas Airport, which is now known as Nellis Air Force Base. After refueling, the plane took off again into the night sky. It was a clear night, but there was no moonlight to help guide them. Around 15 minutes after takeoff, the flight drifted about 7 miles off its intended course. Without warning, it slammed into a steep cliff on Potosi Mountain, which is part of the Spring Mountain Range. The impact happened at an elevation of about 7,770 feet, just about 80 feet below the top of the cliff and around 730 feet below the summit. Sadly, everyone on board lost their lives in the crash. After the crash, the Civil Aeronautics Board, often called the CAB, started a full investigation to figure out what went wrong. They looked closely at eyewitness reports and gathered other important pieces of evidence. What they found was very concerning. After leaving Las Vegas, it appeared that Flight 3 had flown almost in a straight line, about 10 degrees to the right of the official flight path, known as the designated airway. This led the plane straight into rising mountains higher than the plane's flying altitude of 8,000 feet. This discovery gave the investigators an important clue. It showed that the pilots probably did not use the radio navigation system, which helped planes follow safe routes and avoid dangerous terrain. Instead of following the signals from the low-frequency radio beacons, which would have safely guided them, they seemed to rely only on a compass to keep their direction. Following a simple compass heading without radio support made it much harder to stay safely on course, especially at night. Even though the night's visibility was mostly good, there was another big problem. Because the Second World War was going on, most of the airway light beacons that usually helped pilots see their paths had been turned off to protect against enemy attacks. Only a few of these lights were still working, and although one major beacon remained active, it was not enough to fully guide Flight 3 away from danger. One important clue during the investigation came from the flight plan document. The first officer had filled out this form when the plane stopped in Albuquerque. However, there was a problem. The captain had not signed the form, even though airline rules required the captain's signature to approve the plan. On this flight plan, the course written down showed a magnetic heading of 218 degrees for the route after leaving Las Vegas. This heading closely matched the plane's direction before the crash happened. Looking at this information, the investigators realized something alarming. Flying at an altitude of 8,000 feet while following a heading of 218 degrees meant the plane was traveling toward an area where the mountains rose even higher, reaching about 8,500 feet. Because of this, the investigation board concluded that setting this course was clearly a mistake. It placed the airplane on a path where the terrain was too high for the plane to safely pass. The investigators then considered why the pilots might have chosen the wrong course. They noticed that both pilots had more experience flying to Burbank from Boulder City Airport than Las Vegas. Following a magnetic heading of 218 degrees from Boulder City would have made perfect sense, because it would have correctly joined the airway that leads to Burbank. Because of this, the board believed that the pilots might have accidentally used the course they were familiar with from Boulder City instead of adjusting it for the proper route out of Las Vegas. On this particular trip, Boulder City had not been used for refueling because the airport did not have runway lights, which made it unsafe for nighttime landings. That is why the flight had chosen Las Vegas instead. To ensure their thinking was correct, the investigators asked to look at other completed flight plan forms from TWA flights that traveled between Albuquerque and Las Vegas. When they reviewed these forms, they found something surprising. One of the forms from another flight also showed the same wrong outbound course of 218 degrees from Las Vegas. This discovery made it clear that this was not just a one-time mistake. Later, when TWA's chief pilot spoke about this during the investigation, he admitted that the course written on that other form was obviously a mistake, confirming the investigators' suspicions even more. After carefully reviewing all the evidence and details, the Civil Aeronautics Board prepared a final report. In this report, they explained what they believed had caused the crash. According to their findings, the main reason for the accident was the captain's failure to stay on the correct flight path after leaving Las Vegas. Even though he had navigation tools available that could have guided the plane safely, He did not use them properly. Along with the main cause, the board also listed a few other factors that added to the tragedy. One important factor was using the wrong compass heading, which took the plane off course. Another issue was that most of the lighted beacons in the area had been turned off because of the ongoing war, which made night flying even more difficult and risky. Additionally, the investigators pointed out that the pilot had not followed a specific rule set by TWA months earlier. This rule, introduced in July of 1941, came after a recommendation from the Administrator of Civil Aeronautics. It asked pilots to stay strictly on the radio signals, marking the correct route, especially to avoid accidents. Sadly, not following this guidance made the situation even worse. They finally found the location of the Carole Lombard airplane crash. Just a little over 1 month after the attack on Pearl Harbor, a well-known Hollywood actress named Carole Lombard made plans to travel back to her home state of Indiana. She boarded a train in Los Angeles and traveled across the country, finally arriving in Indianapolis, Indiana. Carole's journey had an important mission. She was determined to help raise $500,000 by promoting war bonds to support America's new efforts in World War II. But, as it turned out, her impact was even greater than expected. By the evening of January 15th, she had helped raise more than $2 million, equaling more than $37 million today. Meanwhile, back at home, it was said that Carole and her husband, the famous actor Clark Gable, had argued before she left. Feeling the need to fix things as soon as possible, Carole wanted to return home quickly. She preferred to fly instead of taking the slower route by train. However, there was a challenge. Her mother, Elizabeth Peters, and Clark Gable's press agent, Otto Winkler, were traveling with her, and both were very nervous about flying. To settle the decision fairly, the group agreed to flip a coin. If the coin favored flying, they would take a plane. If not, they would stick with the train. Carole won the toss, so the decision was made to fly back home. They soon boarded TWA Flight 3 at the airport. The aircraft they boarded was a Douglas DST, which stood for Douglas Sleeper Transport. These planes were specially designed for long trips across the country and even offered beds so passengers could rest comfortably. Flight 3 had originally started in New York City, with the final destination set for Burbank Airport in Los Angeles County. Carole and her group joined the flight during one of its stops, ready to complete the last stretch of their trip back to California. After starting from New York, the plane made its first scheduled stop in Indianapolis, Indiana. On January 16th, Carole Lombard, her mother, and Otto Winkler boarded the flight. The plane took off early that morning, around 3 o'clock. Their plan was to reach Burbank Airport later that same evening. Following Indianapolis, the flight made its second stop in St. Louis, Missouri. The main reason for stopping there was to refuel the aircraft before continuing the journey. Once the plane was ready, it took off again and headed toward Albuquerque, New Mexico, for another necessary refueling stop. While they were on the ground in Albuquerque, something unexpected happened. Carole, her mother, and Otto were asked to give up their seats. The airline needed room for 15 United States Army Air Corps members who were also heading to California. However, Carole stood her ground. She explained that she had just helped raise more than $2 million in war bonds to support the country, and felt her mission was just as important. After some discussion, the airline agreed to let Carole, her mother, and Otto stay on board. Instead, 3 other civilian passengers were asked to leave the flight to make space for the soldiers. The next part of the plan was for the plane to fly from Albuquerque to Boulder City Airport for another quick stop. Boulder City Airport, located nearby, was the original refueling point. However, it was too risky to land there safely at night because it was dark, and the airport had no runway lights. So, The decision was made to divert to Las Vegas instead, where the plane could safely land and refuel. The place where they landed is known today as Nellis Air Force Base. After refueling in Las Vegas, the plane departed again around 7 o'clock in the evening. Sadly, just about 15 minutes after taking off, tragedy struck. The plane, flying off course, crashed into the steep side of Mount Potosi. The impact points showed that the left wing struck first, followed by the right wing, and then the nose of the aircraft hit hard against the mountain. The crash happened at a high elevation, and heartbreakingly, all 22 people on board lost their lives instantly. After a steady climb along the trail, the crash site finally appeared. Right in front, along the path, a piece of debris from the airplane lay on the ground. It was clearly part of the wreckage, although it was hard to tell exactly which part of the plane it once belonged to. Looking around a little more closely, even more broken pieces were scattered nearby. Each small discovery brought back a heavy reminder of the terrible accident that had happened here so many years ago. Another piece of debris was found lying a little further down the trail, still resting quietly in the dirt after all this time. It seemed best to leave everything where it was out of respect. Moving along the trail, more wreckage became visible. Small and twisted fragments of the airplane were spread across the hillside. There was not much left, but the impact had clearly been violent. The signs pointed to the plane crashing nose first into the mountain, likely hitting the spot just up ahead, where the rocky slope looked particularly scarred. Looking back, toward where the flight had taken off from Nellis Air Force Base, the plane's path made a chilling sense. The heading they had taken, roughly 218 degrees, formed almost a straight line that ended directly at the base of this cliff. Further up the trail, another small piece of debris appeared among the rocks. A little further along, more fragments could be seen scattered around. One of the pieces looked different from the others. It was twisted and appeared to be melted metal, probably shaped by the intense heat after the crash. Other parts were smaller and more broken, but their sadness remained heavy. As the trail climbed higher, even more parts of the wreckage appeared. Earlier visitors had placed some larger fragments carefully in or near a tree, maybe to keep them from sliding down the mountain. Above that spot, what looked like pieces of the landing gear were tangled in the branches of another tree. It was a silent reminder of how powerful and devastating the crash must have been when the plane struck the steep mountainside. It seemed like some of the airplane parts had been placed near the trees, maybe to stop them from sliding down the mountain during heavy snowfall. No one could say for sure, but whatever the reason, the pieces were still there, holding their place on the steep slope. Not far from that spot, another object caught the eye. It looked like a piece of thin metal, maybe a broken part of the plane's body. Right next to it, another strange-looking piece lay in the dirt. Climbing around the wreckage was not easy. The ground was rough and slippery, and a few hard falls made it even more challenging to move around safely. After getting through the tricky path, a major piece of the wreckage came into view, one of the main landing gears. Standing there gave a better idea of how everything had happened. The main landing gear rested among the rocks, a heavy reminder of the plane's final moments. Looking up from that spot, the steep cliff the airplane had crashed into became visible. Almost everything from the crash was still scattered around that area. A little further down the slope, the remains of one of the main engines could be seen. The other main landing gear rested beneath the engine, barely visible among the rocks and bushes. From that point, it was clear to see the direction the plane had traveled. The impact had happened straight above, high on the cliff. The slope was extremely steep, almost dangerously so. Climbing even a few steps was difficult. It seemed that the right main landing gear had ended up near the lower part of the hill, while the left main landing gear stayed closer to the impact site. Based on how everything was spread out, it made sense to guess that the left landing gear had broken away higher up, while the right one had come to rest further down. As investigators dug deeper into what happened, they discovered that the two pilots did not rely on radio navigation systems during the flight. Instead, they used a magnetic compass to guide them, following a heading of about 218 degrees. This was a big problem because the correct route from Las Vegas Airport should have been closer to 205 degrees. Being about 10 degrees off took the plane far from the safe designated airway. Looking more closely at the situation, the investigators realized something else important. Both pilots were more familiar with flying out of Boulder City Airport than Las Vegas. When leaving Boulder City, a heading of about 218 degrees made perfect sense because it would correctly guide a plane toward Burbank. Because of this, investigators believed the pilots might have used the Boulder City heading out of habit, even though they had taken off from Las Vegas that night. Imagine laying out two lines on a map to better understand the mistake. If the plane took the 218-degree heading from Las Vegas, the line would lead almost perfectly straight into Mount Potosi, exactly where the crash happened. Now, the line would look almost identical if the same 218 degrees heading was drawn from Boulder City. This showed why the investigators were confident that the pilots accidentally followed the wrong heading. If the pilots had used the proper Las Vegas heading of about 205 degrees, their flight path would have looked much different. They would have stayed safely away from the high mountains. After a while, their route would have merged back onto the airway, eventually leading down toward Burbank, their final destination. Going back even further, the map shows the route they should have followed from Las Vegas to Burbank. Sadly, because of the mistake in heading, the plane flew directly into Mount Potosi on January 16, 1942. Investigators remained fairly certain that this mix-up in navigation was the major cause of the crash. The old saying goes, "A small mistake can lead to a great disaster." Today, Carole Lombard's final resting place is inside a peaceful mausoleum. To visit, one would enter through the front door, walk toward the back, and take a left turn inside the building. Her resting place is close to her beloved husband, Clark Gable. Carole Lombard's final journey reminds us how quickly fate can change everything. Her spirit lives on, and so does her story. If this touched you, hit like, subscribe for more untold stories, and let us know your thoughts in the comments below.